This podcast is brought to you by Flipper, a marketplace to buy and sell websites, stores, and digital real estate. Plot your own path. Become a boss by buying a small online business at Flipper. Simply visit flipper.com/techtalks for a free consultation and 50% off fees. That's FLIPPA, flipper.com/techtalks. If you do visit, let me know how you get on. But now, let's get the show started.
Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, do you remember when we had ex-Googler Mini Ingersoll on the podcast? And for those of you that do remember, today's guest is George Arison. That's Arison, Arison, not George Harrison, the Quiet Beetle, but he was her business partner. So talk about a small world. It's one of those strange coincidences that brought him to today's podcast. Now, I invited him on today to discuss how he founded the original rideshare app and turned an idea into a 9-figure tech company. He is the co-founder of Shift, which is an online marketplace disrupting the used car industry. But he has a fantastic story behind that, because George immigrated from Eurasia to the US as a teenager and no sooner began his career as a project manager for Google before going on to co-found the first on-demand mobile transportation booking technology known as Taxi Magic, which I believe is now called Curb. But to put this into perspective, that was 2 years before Uber was even created. But I've probably revealed far too much already. So before I do, before I reveal any more, please buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way back to the US so we can speak with George Arison, who's waiting to speak with us now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
I'm George Arison, and I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Shift, which is a marketplace for buying and selling cars.
Fantastic. And I'm quite excited to find out a little bit more about Shift there. But before we do that, can I take you back to where it all began and ask that you share your story, which I believe began when you immigrated from Eurasia to the United States when you was a teenager. So I feel like there's got to be a huge story there.
There is a big story there. So I was born in Georgia, the country, when it was in the Soviet Union. And I grew up there till I was 14. Super lucky to then be able to move to the US to go to high school, and have lived here pretty much ever since, except for about a year when I went back to Georgia in 2003, 2004. This is all kind of a long time ago, and so Soviet Union was still very much around as a country and as a force, and people were obviously very scared of it. But my dad had this crazy notion that his kids were going to end up living in the United States, which we have. And he really forced us to study English when we were very, very young. And so in the years leading up to the collapse of the Soviet Union, he really pushed this notion that, hey, you're going to go to the US to study. Then in 1989, an American couple came to the US, came to Georgia from the US to teach for a year. We got to know them really well, and they were actually really instrumental in helping me get out by helping me find a prep school that I was accepted at and got a scholarship at, and then making it possible for me to attend. So I came here in 1992, right as the Soviet Union was collapsing, and the world was really fundamentally changing. And today it's really hard for people to kind of conceive of what I'm talking about. But in 1992, there was no internet, there's no email. Communication is really tough. To call Georgia, you have to use a satellite phone. And it costs $8 a minute, or if you call from Georgia to the US. And so really different world to have had that chance to kind of leave and come to the US. And it's been really fortunate for me ever since then.
And once you're in the US, how did you get involved in tech? And what's the story behind you getting involved with Taxi Magic?
So I never thought I'd be doing tech, quite honestly. It was the last thing on my mind, always. In that sense, it was not really my passion at all. I was always super passionate about politics. And I like business in a broad sense. Like the journal was always one of the papers I would read, but I wasn't very focused on kind of the technology side of things, unlike a lot of people who are entrepreneurs, obviously. But then over time, you got more and more into it, especially from the mobile perspective, because I'm really into communication. And so as the kind of initial mobile devices like BlackBerry and iCrack, was a device like that, actually, back in the day, and it were kind of becoming popular, it became more and more interesting for me to use those. We were thinking about business ideas with a couple of friends of mine, including this guy named Tom DePasquale, who's a really prominent entrepreneur on the East Coast, and my best friend from college, Toby Russell, and others. And we cooked up this notion for Taxi Magic, which is still is today in the US a way to book a taxi from your mobile device and to pay for a taxi from your mobile device. And so we came up with that notion both from the perspective of payment. Tom was really interested in the payment side of things because he had built a company called QuickBook, which then became Concur. Now it's part of SAP. And I was really interested from the booking perspective because I didn't actually have a driver's license, and so I would take taxis everywhere. This is when I was at BCG. And so that's how we got the idea kind of started. I honestly knew very little to nothing about technology at this point. It was a complete kind of no man's world for me, but learned a lot in the initial years of working on Taxi Magic and became super educated and really, really interested in it. And over time realized that a lot of the skills that I really liked about politics, or a lot of the things that really made me passionate about politics, are super valuable in being an entrepreneur as well. In particular, trying to be able to tell a story around what you're building and why, being able to attract people to come to you and work with you on something in a passionate way, because without that passion, it's really tough to be a successful startup. And so, I kind of got into tech in a random about way, but it's been a really wonderful opportunity for me. And I've had a lot of, great opportunities to build really awesome things, and it's been really fun.
I love the serendipitous side of your story there. And Taxi Magic is obviously now known as Curb. And I'm curious, though, it did arrive 2 years before Uber was even created. So why do you think Uber ended up on top in the midst of high ride-hailing markets? And if you look back, is there anything you'd change if you went back in time?
Well, there's so many reasons why Uber ended up on top and Lyft did as well, and things that we would do probably differently today. We did get started really early. We were working on the idea in 2006 and we launched the company in 2007. So this is before the iPhone existed. Our notion was that business traveler was a traveler we were going to go after to kind of capture a market share. And I think it was a good place to start. But, what we were thinking is you'd put applications on BlackBerries. And I think we didn't fully appreciate in the beginning how difficult that would be, meaning the BlackBerry made it really, really difficult or next to impossible to put applications on its phones. When the iPhone came out and then came up with the App Store, it became a lot easier to put applications on the phone. And that really changed the game for us and for kind of the mobile ecosystem as well. But by that point, we had invested so much effort and time into building the initial kind of view from the BlackBerry perspective that moving quickly and changing, it wasn't that simple for us. Secondly, we were probably too stuck in our view of what the consumer wanted rather than doing testing and learning. So I think what we should have done is kind of thought about the minimal product we could have launched and then thought about, hey, how do we build that minimal product and then add more product to it over time? Instead, we had this really detailed view of what the product should be and built all of that, then release it to the consumer. And when the customer wanted to use the product differently, we're like, oh no, the customer's wrong. They really should use the product the way we are telling them. And so that was obviously an error as well. I remember later on, Toby, my co-founder at Curb and my co-CEO at Shift, read a book called Lean Startup, and him telling me about this book for the first time, he's like, yeah, it's kind of like he's describing our exact story in terms of all the errors that you can make and what you shouldn't do. So when I read the book, I'm like, like the good news is now there's this book. The bad news is I wish I had this book before we started Taxi Magic, because we would have done things really, really differently. But the last thing there is that really, we still could have actually, I think, won, except that we never really realized that, well, we did realize, but we couldn't get our board to agree to give drivers the phone. So our fundamental dependency always was on a cab company. We were thinking that we would kind of be a software-only business and have the taxi cab be the one that, or the taxi cab company be the one that did the operational side of things. I think what Uber and Lyft did, which is what allowed them to win, is that they actually own the operations as well. And so we really wanted to give drivers the phone, but a lot of people on our board were super against that. They're like, why would you ever do that? Why would you ever get into the notion of having to manage basically cab companies? And I think that's what allowed Uber to really be successful. I mean, the story of ride-hailing that I think no one really fully thinks about is the fact that really the big innovator in the space is Lyft. They're the ones who kind of started this notion of anybody can get into a car and be a driver and earn money. Uber then just copied that, right? Because initially Uber was a black car focused service that was very, very high end focused in the same way that we were taxi focused. And then Lyft came around, did this whole anybody can be a driver, and then Uber copied that because they already had so much infrastructure everywhere. So I think that part of the story is oftentimes lost, and people don't fully appreciate the extent to which Lyft is the really innovating company in this space.
And here in 2020, I'm curious, how do you see the future of mobility and car ownership, not only for today, but obviously looking forward into the future?
Well, I remember when I was raising our Series A, a bunch of people would be like, oh, like, is anyone ever going to own cars anymore? Look at how well Lyft is doing. Look at how well Uber is doing. Self-driving cars are going to be, just around the corner. Within 3 years, everyone's going to have a self-driving car. And I was kind of, like rolling my eyes hearing that kind of nonsense. And I kind of roll my eyes now when I hear similar nonsense. The reality is people want to own a vehicle. And I think if anything, post-COVID, a lot more people are going to own cars now versus what they used to own before, because I think a lot of people who did public transportation in the past are now really uncomfortable with the notion of doing public transportation and will be for a long time. After 9/11, it took 6 years for the ridership numbers in the New York subway to get back to where they were pre 9/11. So I think given the disruption that COVID is causing for the population, I think that the return to public transportation is going to be much, much slower than people expect it to be, even when we have a vaccine. And so I think that car ownership is going to be on the upswing, not the downswing. And we are already noticing that, in San Francisco here, the Muni, is shutting down a huge portion of their lines of travel because they don't have enough demand. And so I'm pretty bullish about car ownership. And I'm also pretty excited about self-driving cars when they come, but we are, I think, at least a decade away from them being kind of truly in the marketplace for a consumer to being able to buy, and even more so, for a cheaper self-driving car for a consumer to be able to buy, at a reasonable price.
And I love how you took the lessons from your past there and the ventures that you're involved with to then go on and create Shift. But for people hearing about Shift for the very first time, can I just ask that you set the scene and tell everyone listening a little bit more about exactly what Shift is and the problems you set out to solve?
Sure. So, in the US at least, right, the dealerships kind of dominate the car purchase process. And 6 years ago, even more so, there was really virtually no digital presence for car purchasing, which was kind of weird when you consider the fact that, it's the largest single retail vertical in the US, and no innovation was kind of happening in this space, right? Which kind of made very little sense. And so the thing that we wanted to go after is kind of figure out a way for consumers to be able to buy a car in a fair and transparent manner with great ease. That was kind of the focus of what we wanted to achieve. And so we set out to do that using technology. I think initially actually is similar to Taxi Magic, we thought that, hey, maybe there is a way to let some of the ecosystem stay the way it is and not have to touch it, and us kind of come in and focus on things like financing and warranty, which you couldn't even get if you're buying a car outside of a dealership today. But you learn as you kind of dig more into the space and peel the onion that you really need to own the entire value chain and entire life cycle if you want to be successful. And so today, if a customer has a car to sell, they can come to shift.com, submit their car information, and we'll price the car for them. And then if they want to work with us, we'll take the car away and they'll never see the car again. And then similarly, if a customer wants to buy a car, they come to shift.com and they're able to then find the car they want, and the car will be delivered to them for a test drive. This entire ecosystem of digital kind of auto retail is super nascent. In the US, like less than 1% of car sales are done this way. There are 3 companies that are really going after the space very actively. We're one of them, and we have a very big market to capture because there's so much opportunity here, to really change how consumers behave or are forced to behave, right? Because I think most customers start their research online and then have no choice but to go offline, to go into a dealership because there's no other way to buy a car. But I think that if you give consumers a choice and buy differently, they'll be able to. Last thing is for us, our belief has always been that for now, at least, consumers very much want to see the car before they purchase. And so what we offer is a test drive delivered to the customer's home. So if you can order groceries to come to your house, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to have a car come to your house prior to buying it. And so that's something we've created in a very unique and differentiated way.
I've had countless emails from listeners over the last few weeks talking about their fears and concerns around job security, while also seeing their interest rates on their savings drop considerably. And as a result, many are beginning to look at how they can invest in their future in an uncertain time. Could digital assets be the answer? Now, you might remember that I spoke to Blake Hutchinson, CEO at Flipper, on episode 1194 about how to buy digital assets and websites. In a nutshell, Flipper is a marketplace that you can buy and sell websites, stores, and digital real estate that are just ready to go. So if you do have dreams of running your own successful online business, or perhaps you're looking to exit your existing online business, my friends at Flipper can help you buy and sell. So if you're interested and want to find out more, please visit flipper.com/tech talks. That's FLIPPA.com/tech talks for a free consultation and also 50% off all fees. But now, back to the interview. So can you walk me through how it all works? Just help listeners understand what to expect when they land on your website for the first time and how to get the most out of the platform.
So when they come to shift.com, they have either the option to buy or to sell a car. Let's assume this customer wants to buy a car. They then look at the cars that we have for sale. And they have a couple of choices. They can either buy the car online, sight unseen, and have that car be shipped to them. So they would then, apply for financing online, complete the entire transaction on their computer or their iPad or their mobile phone, for that matter, because we do have an app on the iPhone. And then the car will be shipped to them, and they'll, get it delivered to their house. Or they can say, no, I actually want to see this car. And if they're in one of our major markets where we operate a delivery capability, which are, on the West Coast of the United States, they can book a test drive where the car will be delivered to them first to be seen by them, driven by them for a little bit. And then if they want to buy, they can buy it in their driveway on an iPad device. So those are kind of the two main choices that we give you.
Excellent. And before you came on the podcast today, I did do a little bit of research, and I quickly learned that you are a non-technical founder and actually a liberal arts major. So I think that's so refreshing to hear. But can you tell me a little bit more about why you believe that is not a weakness? Actually, it's a significant strength.
Well, I think, look, I don't want to just deny the fact that having a computer science background inside the founding team is really important, right? you have to have a CTO if you're founding a company, and I don't ever dispute that. And I'm fully supportive and on board with that. To be honest, when people ask me like, what would you redo in your college experience? I sometimes say, hey, taking 5 computer science classes would have been a really good idea, because I would probably be a better entrepreneur today than I am. That said, I think that having a really broad education, especially in kind of fundamental texts, and learning how to be able to take really complex set of information that is in these texts and how to analyze them and tell a cohesive story through them is really critical to what I do every day. Right? Because most of what I address, I don't actually know how to deal with. I have to go and learn and get educated in how to do it. And then based on the learnings that I gain, make decisions about really, really complex things. I don't know if people have seen this, but we just recently announced that we're going to be doing an IPO through an approach called a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company. So we're going to merge with this company that's already a publicly traded company to become a publicly traded company over the next few weeks. When I started to work on this 6 months ago, I had really virtually no idea what a SPAC meant. And so I had to go through a really intense education to learn how it worked and then figure out how it would apply to Shift. I think without the kind of education I received, which is around kind of reading really, really old historical books that have a lot of very complex content in it, and then learning how to figure out what's important and what's not important in them, and then drive that like content into a decision, I would not be able to do what I did with the SPAC because it is a very complex transaction that has a lot of intricacies to it that are very unique. And most people kind of stay away from that complexity, but for me, it's a passion. So liberal education has really, in an amazing way, prepared me to be a really awesome founder. And I think that, people should not feel afraid to be able to do that as we approach, as they approach their careers, right? I think that it's awesome to study computer science, and they should, but it's also really awesome to study Montesquieu and Hobbes and Plato, and they should study that too, if that makes any sense. And so I have a really kind of strong view on that. Last point being, like, in a world in which artificial intelligence is super important and will be more and more important, ethics becomes a really critical issue. And without a really broad comprehensive education, it's really tough to opine about ethical issues. And so, that's something that I think about a lot as well, and why having more founders with liberal arts backgrounds is super valuable.
And if we look back, you actually founded the original ride-sharing app and turned an idea into a 9-figure tech company. But again, I'm curious, what are the biggest lessons you would say that you've learned along this journey?
Well, a lot of lessons I've learned along the way, and I probably give different answers to people whenever they ask me this question, because it's kind of what's on my mind. I think that the big thing is around mentorship. I think one of the things that, that's really tough for me these days with younger, folks that I interview, is that because people grew up in the age of Google, they have this view that, hey, I can look things up in Google and I kind of have the answer. But in practice, there's very little in business that you can learn from reading about business, right? That's just in practice. And so for me, one of the big drivers of my success has been getting really, really good mentorship and learning from others as I engaged in my business career. And so I think that's a really, really valuable thing for people to appreciate as well. Secondly, risks are painful to take, but I think that, measured risk is always something that I've at least been very comfortable pursuing. And if you want to be in a startup, you need to be very willing to do that. And so, I think thinking through how people can approach that for their own lives is really critical. But I think it's really tough for a lot of folks because they don't, I think, fully get how critical that risk component is when they consider, hey, maybe I go to a startup, et cetera.
And looking to the future, what's next for you? And indeed Shift, of course.
We just, announced a few days ago here that we're going to be doing this SPAC transaction where we'll be merging with a company called the Insurance Acquisition Corporation. It's traded on NASDAQ called INSU. And through that merger, Shift will be becoming a publicly traded company. INSU is a shell company, meaning it doesn't have an operation. It's just a publicly traded company with capital in it from investors. And we're really excited about that. It's going to be a really big deal for us to be a public company. That's something we always wanted to be, and now we're going to be getting there. And Shift's only 6 years old, right? 6.5 years old. So to be able to get there, in this pace is awesome, and it's something we are really excited about, and we think it's going to be great for our consumers. It'll be great for our customers, and it'll be great for our employees and investors. And so I'm super excited about that. So for now, my entire focus is on making that transaction happen and doing all the work that we need to do to get there, as well as growing and making our product be available to more and more people. We have really great market share in places like San Francisco, for example, where we are nearly at, or a little bit over 4% market share actually. But there's a lot more market share to capture across the state of California and the West Coast. And so allowing people to use Shift in a way that makes them happy about their car purchase is something that really excites us and something we want to do. So that's what we're going to be focused on in the coming years.
Such an inspirational story. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be very curious and wanting to find out more about Shift. And of course, there are that many domain extensions now. I'm not going to assume it's a .com address. So can you remind everyone listening of where they can find you online, and also contact your team if they're left with any questions?
Well, shift.com is our company website, obviously. So that's an easy one. I'm George Arison on LinkedIn and Twitter. So folks are, of course, welcome to go there as well.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and share your story with me today, and also talk about the future of mobility and car ownership and the lessons you've learned on your journey. So hopefully we can stay in touch and speak again in the near future. But again, big thank you for joining me today, George.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
George is an incredible innovator and businessman, and loved chatting with him today about not only being a non-technical founder and a liberal arts major, but also the future of mobility and car ownership and the lessons he's learned along his tech startup journey too. And what I also found funny there is I think we all know someone that has said, you know what, I had the idea of Uber originally ages ago when I was in the shower. But let's be honest, I think there is only George that is qualified to tell that story now. But please, let me know your thoughts on any aspect of today's podcast, or indeed any interview you've heard recently, or if you just want to ask me a question. Email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn @NeilCHughes. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So keep those questions coming in. Remember, I've also got a new podcast out with Netgear this week called Switched On Thinking. Feel free to check that one out if you are left wanting more. I doubt it you are, after having my voice in your ears 7 days a week. I don't want to push my luck, but if you do check it out, let me know. Other than that, a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.